Welcome to Canning with Colette, water bath canning, 9-step process. In this presentation, you will learn the process necessary for home canning food using the water bath method, also known as the boiling method. I have divided this process into 9 easy steps. Many of these steps were discussed in previous presentations in more detail. Just as a reminder, the water bath method can only be used when canning high acid foods. As you learned, high acid foods fall on the pH acidity chart at 4.6 and below. They are typically things like fruits and or pickled foods. So let's get into it. Step 1. Your canners. Prepare your canner by washing thoroughly with warm soapy water, rinsing well and then filling about 3/4 full of water. Here are 2 examples of typical water bath canners. Either style will do. Whichever canner you're using, you want to make sure that it has a rack that fits inside of it and covers the bottom of the canner that your jars will be setting on, as shown in this photo. Most canners will automatically come with some type of rack. If your canner did not come with a rack, they can be bought separately. Any kind of rack will do. Here are a few examples. You can purchase the official canning rack here on the top, or something like these simple pie cooling racks will do. And here's a tip. If you're unable to get your hands on a rack in a timely manner, you can place any cloth in the bottom of the canner, such as a pot holder or dishcloth. As long as your jars are able to rest upon the cloth and not touch the bottom of the canner directly, you're in good shape. The whole purpose here is for your jars not to touch the very bottom of the canner.
Jelly. So I'm not going to be using my really huge canning pot, that really big one that you typically see. I'm actually using a average, medium to large size stock pot, and it will work just fine. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to be doing that. So as long as you have a stock pot that has a fitting lid, you can use this canning method the same way you would with that big large pot that you typically see. All right, so one thing that you will have to do is you will have to have either a rack or a towel or something in the bottom so that your jars don't rattle and crack. Now what I'm going to actually use, I have these old pot holders, and I'm just going to drop them right in here, excuse me, so that, pardon me, so that my jars are not sitting flat on the bottom of my pot. So you might be able to see, I'll bring you a little bit closer. All right, so I'm going to actually just drop this in there. All right, and it's going to soak to the bottom. Now I can help it along a little bit. All right, but once I place my jars on there, it will be at the bottom. So looks like I'm only going to need the 1 pot holder. So that's good. All right, so my jars are already washed. So I'm going to be using my jar lifter to lower my jars into the pot. I'm going to fill it up with a little bit of water, like scoop a little water inside when I lower them, and then just place them right in there. Let them sit there. Bring it a little bit closer. You can see. All right. So I only have about 4. These are the half pint size jars. Okay, typically used for like jelly.
All right, and so that was just a demonstration where if you didn't have a rack, you could place some type of cloth in the bottom of your canner. Step 2. Wash and sterilize your jars. As demonstrated in a previous presentation, we always want to be sure to wash our jars thoroughly with hot soapy water using a sponge, dishcloth, or a brush. After washing the jars, you're going to place them inside the canner onto a rack or cloth. Submerge with water, being sure to allow for 1.5 inches of water above the rim or mouth of the jars. As mentioned in the presentation entitled Washing and Sterilizing Jars, the NCHFP no longer requires sterilizing jars for recipes that will be processed in a water bath canner longer than 10 minutes. Of course, you may choose to still sterilize your jars, regardless of the processing time. Once your jars come to a rapid boil, like shown in this photo, set your timer for 10 minutes for the sterilization process. When the 10 minutes are up, turn off your heat and leave the jars inside of the canner until ready to be filled with food. This allows your jars to stay warm until it is time to add food to them, which is why I choose to still sterilize my jars. Step 3. Prepare your food. Believe it or not, this step is the real work. Depending on the recipe for what it is you're canning, you may need to do quite a bit of prepping. Here's a tip. If you're able to do any prepping ahead of time, like say for example the night before even, that's completely fine and encouraged. Step 4. Fill your jars. Using a large ladle and funnel, fill each jar one by one with your food contents, leaving the appropriate open headspace. The ladle gives you control and allows you to get a lot in the jar at one time, and the funnel helps cut down on spills. Using the tool called the headspace ruler or bubble remover, use the bubble remover end to remove air pockets by sliding it in between the food and the interior of the jar, moving it up and down a few times. FYI, the bubble remover is also referred to as the debubbler. The headspace is the open space between the top of the food and the top of the jar. All official canning recipe books will provide you with the correct headspace for your canned food or liquid. In this photo, you can see the various measurements of the headspace that are typically used when canning: 1/4, 1/2, or 1 inch. After filling your jars and debubbling, you will now measure the headspace. Each notch on the headspace ruler represents 1/4 of an inch, or 1/4 of an inch. When placing the first bottom notch on the mouth of the jar, it measures 1/4 inch. The second notch up is 1/2 inch. The third notch up is 3/4 inch. And the last notch up represents a full inch. In this photo, the headspace ruler is placed at the half notch. This means the recipe called for 1/2 inch of headspace to be left open, with no food in that space from the top of the food to the top of the jar. Here's another demonstration of me measuring the headspace. In this photo, it appears I am measuring for 1 inch of headspace.
Better view. So you're just kind of taking your headspace ruler. So this is the end that we measure, and this is the end that we usually use for debubbling. And just kind of just going around the interior a couple times, and that just kind of will help pop out any air pockets that might be in there. Maybe 4 or 5 times around. Okay, real simple process. Now, after I've done that, now I will go ahead and start to measure. So now I'm going to kind of wipe that off, and I'll flip it to this end. So you have these little notches on there. So each notch indicates a measurement. This first notch is a 1/4 inch, then we have 1/2 inch, 3/4, and a full inch. So depending on the recipe, it will determine the headspace. So for this recipe, it requires a 1/2 inch headspace, which means this 1/2 inch notch is where I'll place it on the mouth of the jar. Okay, and so this part is where the food should touch, but the food should not be above it or below it. The food should hit right at the tip there. Okay, so I'm going to place it on the jar, on that 1/2 inch mark there, and then the food should not come above the bottom of this tip or below it. Okay, so I'm going to make sure the food is even, and I'm going to measure. Looks pretty good, but it kind of looks like I could use a smidget more. Smidget more. Okay, and we measure. That looks good. All right, and we'll do the same for this one. Just going to kind of like smooth it out a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. Smooth this one out a little bit. Looks good. Sometimes you have to, okay, now this one, the tip is sticking into the food. So I don't know if you can kind of see, but it's in, it's kind of sticking in there. That means this is too full. I need to remove a little bit, right? So I'm going to take a little bit out. And I'm just going to show you real quick. This one here, I can visually see that this needs more. See that? Look, it's not even, the tip of the bottom tip of this ruler is not even touching the food. And as you can see, if you just look at it, you can tell this is about 1 inch of headspace, but I only need 1/2 inch. I'm going to add more to this, take some out of this one. This one looks a little, this is a little bit over. Yeah, it's sticking into the food. So you can, I don't know how well this camera is showing it, but you can see the tip is actually sticking into the food. We don't want that. We want it more like this. How this one is right at the top of the food. It's not, it's not sticking into the food, and the food is not above it. So I'm going to make these adjustments. I'm going to grab me a spoon that I can just remove a little bit. That's all. So this one I got to take a little bit out, and I'll just remeasure. That's probably all I need to do. Use this just a little smidget. Smidget. Okay, yeah, that looks much better. Now this one I gotta add too. So let's add a little bit to it. Okay, I don't know if I didn't add too much. I don't think I added too much. Yeah, I added too much. Okay. Check it out. Okay, that looks a little better. Nope, a little more needs to come out of here. No, I got too much. Let's see. Nope. I gotta add a little bit more. God, I gotta get this right. Okay, now that looks good. Yeah, that looks good. This one definitely has too much in it. I'm gonna take out some of the bigger pieces. Alright, smooth it out. Okay, yeah, it looks pretty good.
All right, and so that was just an example of me first debubbling, removing the air pockets, and then measuring the headspace in this salsa mango. Step 5. Clean jar rims. Because there may be some food particles or residue on the mouth of the jars, they must be cleaned using either a paper towel or a clean cloth dipped in either hot water or white vinegar. White vinegar is preferred because it does a great job at removing any sticky substances. This step is very important. If this step is forgotten, it could cause your jars not to properly seal, and we don't want that. Step 6. Add lids and bands. Using your magnetic lid lifter, center and place the lid onto the jar. Then place your band over the lid onto the jar. When placing the bands on, it is important to not screw them on too tight. You want to screw them on fingertip tight, meaning just enough to secure the lids onto the jar, but not so tight that the air cannot escape. Just a gentle yet secure twist should do it.
Alright, so I've got my magnetic lid lifter that I'm going to use to remove the lids that were just kind of soaking in the water here. And I'm just going to place them on top of the jar. Each jar, one lid. Okay. Hope you're able to see this well. And then my bands, I'm going to shake off the water and then place my bands on. And just lightly tighten, very gentle. You never want to put them on super tight. Just going to do a fingertip tight. Just very gentle.
And that was just a demonstration of me placing my lids and bands on. Step 7. Load jars into canner for processing. One by one, using your jar lifter, place each jar into the water bath canner onto the rack or cloth inside. Remember, the jars are not to touch the bottom of the canner directly. This could cause your jars to crack, which is why we use a rack or a cloth. After all of the jars are loaded into the canner, place the lid on and turn your burner up to high. Once the water comes to a rolling boil, set your timer for the specific processing time for your home canned approved recipe. Step 8. Remove jars from canner and allow them to set on a countertop about 2 inches apart from each other on a cloth or a towel, undisturbed for 18 to 24 hours. Now, undisturbed means undisturbed. Do not remove the bands, do not tilt the jars, do not touch the jars. They are actually still processing. Step 9. Test your jars for proper vacuum seal. Date and store. After 18 to 24 hours, you will test your jars for proper vacuum seal by first removing the bands of the jars. Next, push into the center of each jar with your finger to see if there's any movement at all. There should be no movement or popping of the lid. Next, you will try to remove the lid with the strength of your fingers. You should not be able to loosen or remove the lid in any way with the strength of your hand. If everything checks out, then your jars have created a proper vacuum and are sealed. You should now date your jars with the date you made them, or you can place an expiration date on them instead. Home canned food is at its best within the first 12 to 18 months. After that, your food may begin to break down in texture, the color may begin to fade, and nutritional value will slowly decrease. So it's best to eat it within that time period to get the most benefit out of it. However, FYI, your food does not magically go bad after you hit the 12 or 18-month mark. It is simply a time to start assessing and possibly consider eating it sooner than later. And those are the simple 9 steps of water bath canning. You are almost near the end of this online course. After completing this course, I recommend you consider signing up for one of my hands-on water bath canning classes so you can put what you've learned to use and start canning right away. You now know the many benefits of canning, the different kinds of canning, what equipment you need, and now you know the steps it takes to water bath can. So let's get into the game. I hope this presentation was useful and valuable, and I'll see you in the next class. Remember, we can do this. Peace, y'all.